Well, welcome, family and friends of Catalina Foothills Church. John Miller here with part 5 in a series of studies, brief studies in the book of Proverbs. And today we come to a most interesting subject, a powerful subject, the subject of sexual integrity or the temptation toward sexual immorality. Something obviously that I think every one of us cares a lot about. And many followers of Jesus have struggled in this area. And so King Solomon deals with it. Ironically, he had huge struggles in his own life, but God gave him wisdom. Whether he took that wisdom or not, that's a matter of record. We need to take that wisdom because the Spirit of God gave him important truth for us to receive. Now, chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Proverbs are worth reading because for the most part they speak of the temptation of the adulteress. And that can be looked at in a couple of different ways. First of all, it's a father and a son. So 5, 6, and 7 is the father Solomon speaking to his son and really exhorting him and warning him not to fall into sexual temptation. Certainly with a daughter, we could say, well, daughter, here's how not to be that kind of person. But we're zeroing in on the father-son relationship here. And it culminates in the last several verses of chapter 7, and that's what I want to read to you and just take a quick look at. But I encourage you to read 5, 6, and 7. I've encouraged each of our 4 sons at an age and stage to read that and contemplate it and to talk about it together because it's real, especially in our sensual world. And I mean sensual in a negative because it's a neutral term. But our sensualistic world that we live in right now. And of course, that's been the issue ever since Adam and Eve fell into sin. But I direct your attention, if you don't have your Bible, grab it, pause me, and get it. But chapter 7, beginning with verse 21, with persuasive words she led him astray. Now this is the culmination of a whole section talking about a man getting lured into temptation, into lust. And by the way, you can apply, not only sexual temptation, but other kinds of lust that draw us in, and like a tractor beam, like a magnet that just pulls us in, whether it's food or drugs or some kind of entertainment or whatever it might be. But obviously we're dealing with specifically sexual temptation. So with her persuasive words, she led him astray. She led him off the beaten path that God had called him to go in this story. And persuasive words means that there was a discussion going on. There was banter. There was a persuasive attitude of this temptation that finally the particular person gave into. It says she seduced him with her smooth talk. And so, this is, in other words, you give it an inch, you'll take a mile. You're not to listen. One man sees evil and hides himself, Proverbs says. The other proceeds and pays the penalty. Once we see evil, don't allow, your inner desires to be sucked in by that, because these culmination verses really speak to the danger of it. Verse 22, all at once he followed her. So it happens really quickly. Not like in Joseph's case where Potiphar's wife tempted him day after day. He lived in that house. And finally, she wanted to grab him to have relations with him. And he got out of there so fast, he actually ran out of his coat. She grabbed the coat and kept it. It happens quickly once you give it that inch. And that's why we can't do that. in this world. And that has to do with what we see on TV, what goes through our mind, our ears, our eyes. And yet we live in the cesspool, and yet God says you're not to be of it. And that's the challenge today. Verse 22 goes on to say, like an ox to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose. And so that's the way it is when we give in to sexual temptation. It is so incredibly dangerous. And then it goes on and says, till an arrow pierces his liver, vital organ. An arrow pierces his liver, like a bird's darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Wow, that's powerful. I remember a man was committing adultery, and I went and confronted him, and I said, "You can't do this." You know, he's a deacon in the church and a brother who meant a lot to me. And he said, "John, I can't help it. I've gone too far. I love my wife, but he was not making any sense." And that's what happens when we become a temporary atheist. We just cast God aside in order to let our lust run wild. He didn't know it was going to cost him his life, and it cost his family dearly. Verse 24 says, "Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say." See, this is the Spirit of God speaking to us, not just Solomon to his son. "Do not let your heart turn to her ways." Very persuasive, very effective, very powerful, magnetic. Don't let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Many. And you know what? I've lived long enough where I've known some powerful people, I mean in the Christian community, who have been taken out by sexual temptation, absolutely destroyed. And it caused almost, some of those gave me goosebumps, because I thought, well, who am I, man? Those people were walking with God and being used greatly of him, and they fell. How could that happen? And I knew I needed to guard my heart in that way. And it's just the way it is. Many are the victims she has cast down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the highway to hell. You see it there? Her house is the highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. So we are not to give in to sexual temptation in the slightest. And so this is just an exhortation for all of us this morning, this day, whatever time you're listening to this. But I hope you'll take it seriously, and you'll read 5, 6, and 7 of the book of Proverbs. Thank you for letting me share with you today.